The alien princess was trapped in orbit, but Earth's fleet turned the battle. The alarms had been sounding for hours, a deep, low-frequency pulse that rattled bulkheads and drove exhaustion into every nerve, and though Commander Aaron Hale had grown used to the hum of warships, there was something about this tone, this drawn-out dirge, that reminded him not of discipline or military readiness but of funerals. He stood on the bridge of the Resolute, Earth's oldest carrier still in active duty, and watched the vast curve of the alien world below, its atmosphere marred by firelines and smoke plumes visible even from orbit, cities burning with a kind of hopeless defiance. The princess was down there, or had been at least, before the orbital nets tightened, before the enemy's blockade sealed every exit path and cut communications to silence. Reports said she was alive, hidden in some orbital transfer station when the planetary shields collapsed, and though the politicians on Earth whispered about leverage and bargaining chips, every soldier on this ship knew the truth. If she was captured, it would not be for trial or negotiation but for execution, broadcast across the galaxy as a warning that no world, no royal line, and no fragile treaty could resist the will of the Empire. Hale exhaled slowly, the recycled air of the ship dry and metallic on his tongue, and he thought about how many times he had been asked to hold ground, to stand as a wall between annihilation and survival. But never before had survival hinged on a single life. The alien princess was not just royalty to her people. She was the symbol of continuity, the last living heir to a dynasty that had bound fragmented star clans into something like unity, the fragile thread between old warlords and the promise of peace. And to Earth, though she was not one of them, she was the only one who had argued for humanity's inclusion in the Council of Stars, the only one who had stood in shimmering robes before a chamber of 1,000 voices and insisted that a young, dangerous species deserved a seat at the table. Hale had never met her, had only seen the archived holo recordings of that speech, the way her voice carried strength even through translation filters, the way her eyes seemed both wary and compassionate, but he knew enough. Without her, Earth would stand alone again, an outsider species on the fringe of galactic affairs, easy prey for those who considered humans little more than clever animals who had learned to build ships. He leaned over the tactical console, its surface glowing with red and amber threat markers, hundreds of enemy signatures scattered like shards of broken glass across orbit, and felt the weight of impossible orders pressing into his spine. The fleet was small by galactic standards. The Resolute, 2 destroyers running on engines that whined louder than they should, and half a dozen frigates patched together from old wars, their hulls scarred, their weapons older than most of the recruits. Against them, the enemy had deployed carriers larger than cities, cruisers bristling with plasma cannons, and swarms of drone fighters that turned void into a glittering storm of hostile light. Earth had no right to be here, no logical reason to throw ships into this battle except stubborn loyalty to a promise given to an alien throne, and yet here they were, trapped in orbit just as much as the princess herself, every jump corridor cut off by interdiction fields, every escape vector collapsing under hostile fire. Hale could feel the tension in his crew, young men and women gripping their stations like lifelines, their eyes darting to him for assurance, and he forced his voice into calm steadiness as he issued updates, orders, reassurances he was not sure he believed himself. "Status of the search grid?" he asked, turning toward Lieutenant Marin, who had been hunched over the comms array for what felt like days. "Still nothing solid," she replied, her voice hoarse but determined. "We pick up bursts of encrypted signals, but they die before we can triangulate. Could be her. Could be traps." Hale nodded. Traps were more likely. The Empire was clever in its cruelty. It would bait them with fragments, make them bleed ships and lives chasing hope. But something in his gut, something he couldn't explain to the tactical AI or to the Fleet Council, told him she was alive. He had survived too many campaigns by trusting that instinct to ignore it now. "Keep monitoring. Don't disregard any signal, however faint," he ordered. "If she's out there, we'll find her." The bridge was silent except for the constant hum of systems and the distant, shuddering echoes of impacts as enemy skirmishers probed their shields. Hale walked slowly to the viewport, his boots clanging softly on the deck, and stared at the stars streaked by weapons fire. The void was littered with debris, fragments of ships, torn metal spinning end over end, fuel leaking in trails of frozen mist. It looked less like a battlefield and more like a graveyard, a silent accusation against every commander who had ever dared to believe war was clean. He thought of the princess again, trapped somewhere in that hostile orbit, perhaps watching the same skies from behind bars, wondering if anyone would come. And though he was not a man given to prayers, Hale found himself whispering into the silence, a vow more than a plea: "Hold on. Just hold on." A sudden alarm ripped through the bridge. Marin snapped her head up, eyes widening. Unscheduled transport signature. Local orbit, low power. It's faint but real. Could be a civilian shuttle, could be her. Hale finished, already moving back to the tactical console. Show me. The display flared to life, magnifying a weak, flickering blip hidden in the radiation belt. A shuttle, small, almost invisible, broadcasting nothing. Too quiet for a decoy, too desperate for a military craft. Hale's jaw tightened. That's her, he said firmly. It has to be. Commander, it's deep inside the blockade, Marin warned. Any approach will light us up. We'll be cut apart before we can reach it. Maybe, Hale said, his mind already sketching vectors, plotting risks. Or maybe they're so sure no one would dare that they haven't sealed the gap tight enough. If she's on that shuttle and we leave her, this entire war ends before it begins. Earth loses its only ally. We lose our place in the stars. He turned toward his crew, his voice rising, not as a commander but as a man demanding more than survival. We didn't come here to play it safe. We came here to pull her out. Set course. Now. The ship groaned as thrusters fired, the Resolute swinging into a new vector, shields flaring against the first probing shots of enemy cruisers. Fighters launched from the belly bays, tiny bursts of light scattering into formation, and the destroyers peeled off to draw fire, their captains answering Hale's gamble without hesitation. The bridge shook as weapons discharged, the sound more felt than heard, a low thunder vibrating in bone. Hale gripped the railing, his eyes fixed on the distant flicker of the shuttle, and for a moment the battle blurred into abstraction. Just noise, just fire, because all that mattered was that faint, stubborn spark refusing to die. Enemy squadrons swarmed them, drones darting like angry insects, but Earth's frigates fought like wolves, tearing into them with outdated cannons that spat metal slugs instead of plasma. A crude but devastating surprise against shields tuned for energy fire. Hale's lips twitched in a grim smile. Humans had always fought dirty, and sometimes dirt was exactly what won wars. The shuttle grew closer, larger on the display, until its shape resolved. Battered hull, scorch marks across the nose, emergency beacons smashed. And still it moved, crawling toward some hopeless orbit, as if whoever piloted it had sworn not to stop no matter the cost. Open a channel, Hale ordered. Static hissed, broken, tortured, and then, just for a heartbeat, words emerged, faint, musical, trembling with both command and desperation. This is Althira of the Ninth Line, requesting. The bridge froze. Every officer, every crewman turned their heads as though those words carried a weight heavier than steel. Hale felt his chest tighten. It was her. Against all odds, against the blockade, against the universe itself, it was her. He leaned forward, his voice rough but steady. Princess Althira, this is Commander Hale of Earth's fleet. Hold course. We're coming for you. The reply was faint, distorted, but clear enough to sear itself into memory. You shouldn't, they will destroy you. Let them try, Hale said. The shuttle's weak signal flared brighter, as if in answer, and the enemy ships suddenly shifted, their formation tightening, dozens of crimson signatures veering toward the human fleet. Hale knew what it meant. They had found her too, and they would not let her go without turning orbit into a slaughterhouse. He straightened, his hand closing into a fist on the console, and shouted the only order that mattered. All ships, protect the shuttle. Form a wall and burn everything that comes near. The Resolute surged forward, its cannons roaring, and orbit ignited into war. The void erupted into chaos the instant the order was given, a storm of fire and light tearing across orbit as Earth's battered fleet threw itself against a wall of steel meant to be impenetrable, and Commander Aaron Hale felt every shudder of the Resolute as if the ship's wounds were his own flesh splitting apart. Plasma bolts slammed against their shields, drones screamed past in blinding trails, and yet the fleet held formation, frigates darting to intercept, destroyers opening fire with salvo after salvo, their outdated guns bellowing in a rhythm as old as war itself, iron and wool clashing against energy and arrogance. Hale's eyes never left the shuttle, the faint, fragile spark that carried the alien princess through this maelstrom, and he barked orders with the clipped certainty of a man who knew hesitation meant death. Tactical, feed-targeting solutions to the destroyers. Frigates harry their flanks. Keep that corridor open. He moved from station to station like a conductor in the middle of a symphony played with weapons and shields, every crew member straining against exhaustion, their fear buried under discipline, their determination sharpened by the knowledge that they were standing between extinction and something worth dying for. The enemy pressed hard, swarms of fighters peeling off in disciplined arcs, attempting to overwhelm the human line, but Earth's fleet fought with a savagery born of desperation. Old frigates, their hulls patched and painted a dozen times, charged headlong into the storm, their gunners firing until barrels glowed white, tearing enemy drones to molten shards. The destroyers roared with heavier guns, volleys punching holes in cruisers' armor, shocking foes who had believed humans incapable of such precision under pressure. And at the heart of it all, the Resolute moved like a battered lion, its massive cannons belching fire, its shields flickering but unbroken, each blast clearing a path for the tiny shuttle inching closer. Hale could hear her voice still, faint in the comms, broken by static but alive, every syllable pushing him harder. You shouldn't, they will destroy you. Those words haunted him, not because of fear, but because of the quiet resignation in them, the sound of someone who had seen too many promises broken, who expected to be abandoned in the end. You would not abandon her. Earth would not. Not after everything she had done to stand for them. He slammed a fist against the console. Engineering, bleed everything we have into forward shields. Navigation, keep us in line with that shuttle. If we fall, it won't be because we drifted off course. The deck jolted as an enemy cruiser's barrage slammed into them, a brutal hammer of plasma fire that sent sparks raining from overhead conduits. Damage alarms wailed, voices shouted, but Hale forced himself to remain still, to stand as the one immovable presence in a storm. Report, he barked. Shields at 40% and dropping. Marin called, sweat dripping down her temple. Secondary batteries offline on deck 12. Then reroute power from anything not critical, Hale ordered. I don't care if we lose gravity in half the ship, keep those shields up. The princess is not dying under our watch. The words steadied the crew not because they erased the fear but because they gave it shape. This was not about faceless survival, not about another skirmish in a war with no end, but about one life, one vow, one line of hope they would not let be severed. The bridge officers snapped to it, hands flying across consoles, rerouting, recalculating, refusing to yield. Outside, space turned white-hot as missiles streaked from Earth's destroyers, slamming into an enemy battleship with such ferocity that its shields cracked like glass, fragments scattering into the void. For a heartbeat, the battlefield shifted, the enemy taken aback by the ferocity of these primitive humans. Hale seized the moment. Push forward. Drive them back. The fleet responded with a unified surge, ships pressing through the breach, and for the first time since orbit had collapsed into chaos, the shuttle was within reach. Commander. Marin cried, eyes wide as the sensors flared. New signatures, multiple, emerging from behind the moon's shadow. Hale's heart clenched. Reinforcements. Of course they would send more. The Empire would never risk losing the princess alive. The display filled with crimson markers, a dozen new warships unfolding from hyperspace like blades unsheathed, cutting through the darkness with a cold, inevitable gleam. His crew stiffened, silence falling for a moment heavy enough to crush bones. Even his own chest tightened, air suddenly sharp in his lungs. They were outnumbered, outgunned, trapped between an enemy already pressing hard and fresh forces that would close the vice until there was nothing left. But then he looked at the shuttle again, scarred, limping, still alive, and something inside him refused to yield. He had been a soldier too long to believe in miracles, but he believed in people, in the will to fight when the universe demanded surrender. And he believed in the oath he had made, whispered in silence on the bridge hours ago. Hold on. Just hold on. We hold the line, Hale said quietly and then louder, his voice cutting through dread like steel through cloth. We hold until she's safe. I don't care if it takes everything we have. The bridge erupted back into motion, voices firm, hands steady, fear turning into defiance. Orders cascaded, weapons fired, shields flared. The fleet shifted, frigates darting in sacrificial maneuvers to cover the shuttle, destroyers pivoting to intercept the new arrivals. They would bleed for her, bleed for the promise of something greater than themselves, and Hale knew every one of them understood it. The enemy ships advanced, sleek giants glinting with menace, but Earth's fleet moved with an energy no algorithm could predict. Outdated weapons fired in perfect synchronization, missiles weaving between plasma bolts, frigates darting into gaps no sane pilot would dare, destroyers flanking with brutal intent. The Resolute's cannons thundered, their recoil vibrating through every deck, and one enemy cruiser staggered, its hull splitting open in a bloom of fire. Cheers erupted on the bridge, brief, sharp, but Hale silenced them with a raised hand. Don't celebrate. Not yet. She's still not aboard. The shuttle, fragile and failing, finally breached the outer edge of their defensive line. It was close enough now that sensors could confirm life signs, multiple but one signature stronger, unmistakable in its energy. The princess. Elthira of the Ninth Line. Hale exhaled a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, but even as relief whispered through him, reality bit hard. The reinforcements were closing fast and their line would not hold forever. Prepare docking bay 2, Hale ordered. Get recovery teams ready. When that shuttle makes contact, we cover it with everything we have. The comms crackled again, her voice emerging faintly. You shouldn't, you'll die for me? Hale's eyes hardened. He pressed the comm override. Not for you, princess. For what you represent. For what you've already done for us. For every human who still believes we belong out here. You are not dying in orbit. Not today. The shuttle angled in, its thrusters sputtering, and Earth's ships curved around it like a shield wall, weapons blazing. The new enemy reinforcements opened fire, torrents of plasma scouring the void, but the human fleet did not break. Frigates exploded, destroyers reeled, the Resolute's shields burned to the brink, yet still they held, still they fired, still they clawed forward. Hale's knuckles turned white on the console, but his voice stayed steady, carrying across the bridge, across every deck. For Earth. For the princess. Hold the line. The shuttle drew closer, meters from docking, the air trembling with urgency, alarms blaring as enemy fire shredded through outer decks. The Resolute shook violently, panels bursting, flames licking across the bridge. Smoke filled the air, crew coughing, eyes stinging, but Hale did not look away from the viewport, from that single fragile vessel that meant everything. And then, with a shuddering lurch, the shuttle slipped into docking clamps, the sound of magnetic locks snapping into place carrying through the ship like a heartbeat. Relief erupted, a wave of cheers, tears, shouted oaths, but Hale raised his hand again, his voice cutting through the chaos. She's aboard. Now make damn sure she lives long enough to matter. All ships redirect fire. Show them what it means to face Earth. The enemy reinforcements bore down, overwhelming, merciless, but Earth's fleet roared back with a defiance that turned the battlefield into legend. The alien princess was no longer trapped in orbit. She was aboard, alive, and Earth's blood and steel would see her safe. The final battle began with silence, not the silence of peace but the breathless pause before the storm, the weight of two civilizations suspended in orbit around a half-broken planet as ships arrayed themselves in lines of fire, and within that stillness Daniel sat strapped into his command chair aboard the Dauntless, Earth's flagship, watching the alien princess's stasis pod float gently in the medbay behind armored glass, her pulse faint but steady, the only reminder of what all of this blood and metal meant, for he had carried her through fire and ruin, through betrayal and the jaws of death. And now the galaxy would either crush them both or finally bend to a future where human defiance could no longer be dismissed. Fleet Command whispered orders into his ear, a dozen admirals debating tactics, but Daniel's eyes fixed only on the massive carrier at the center of the enemy armada, the sovereign throne of the Caris Imperium, the vessel that had once been her prison and now rallied her betrayers, a ship larger than mountains and bristling with weapons that could annihilate cities in a heartbeat. The first exchange of fire came like lightning across the void. Railgun slugs screamed through the dark, ripping into escort frigates, plasma lances arced like burning rivers, and missiles painted trails of light before shattering into blossoms of annihilation, the quiet of orbit erupting into a storm that swallowed entire fleets. Earth's battleships fought not with grace but with fury, tearing through enemy shields with brutal precision, every salvo punctuated by the thought of home, of cities and children who would never forgive surrender, and though they were outnumbered, the human ships moved with a desperation no alien admiral could calculate, because defeat meant extinction and victory meant a chance, however slim, to decide their own destiny. Daniel's voice cut through the chaos, orders barked without hesitation, his hand steady on controls as the Dauntless dove between lines of fire, unleashing its cannons point-blank against enemy hulls, and in the medbay the alien princess stirred, her eyes fluttering open, confusion giving way to fear as the walls trembled with each impact. She whispered his name, soft, almost broken, and for a moment Daniel's heart faltered, but the battle allowed no pause and he told her through the comms that this was her war too, that together they would either shatter chains or be buried under them, and she nodded, pale but resolute, her gaze sharpening with a strength born of survival, a strength that made him believe even against the impossible. Hours bled into one another, fleets burning like constellations torn apart, wreckage drifting to form a graveyard around the planet below. Yet neither side broke, for the Imperium would not yield their prize, and Earth would not abandon her, and it seemed the war would stretch until nothing was left alive, until Daniel made the choice that no admiral before him had dared. He ordered the fleet to break formation, not retreat but converge, every ship hammering toward the enemy carrier in one Suicidal spearhead, shields collapsing, hulls disintegrating under the torrent of alien fire, but the Dauntless led them through, engines screaming, weapons flaring like dying stars, and suddenly the impossible happened. The spear struck true, the carrier's shields buckled, its armor split, and Daniel gave the final order to drive the ship straight into its heart. The alien princess cried out, not in fear but in grief, because she knew what such a command meant, but Daniel smiled through the blood on his lips and told her that humanity had always been underestimated, that love was the one weapon the enemy could never counter. And then the Dauntless tore into the throne in a blaze of fire, detonating reactors that consumed both ships in an explosion brighter than dawn, a supernova in orbit that lit the sky of the broken world below. For a moment there was nothing but silence again, a silence so vast it felt eternal, until out of the debris a smaller shuttle emerged, scarred and burning, and within it the alien princess awoke to see Earth's fleet still standing, battered but alive, Daniel beside her, unconscious but breathing, having thrown himself into the last escape pod as the Dauntless burned behind them. Across the comms, the Imperium's remaining ships faltered, their command destroyed, their will broken, and one by one they began to withdraw, leaving behind wreckage and surrender, the battle over, the war rewritten. The alien princess pressed her forehead to Daniel's, tears falling as she whispered that he had not just saved her but given her people a chance to dream of freedom beyond chains. And though he did not wake to hear her words in that moment, she vowed aloud that she would never let his sacrifice fade into dust, that she would carry his name across stars until even the galaxies remembered, and as Earth's fleet formed a protective wall around their tiny shuttle, guiding it back toward the blue of home, it became clear to all who witnessed that day that humanity had not merely fought for survival, they had fought for love, and in doing so had turned the tide of history.